I'm back, and we're in part two of the addiction lecture. You'll see a diagram of baseline metabolism. Now, what this really says is that, and you can see this here, let's see if I can get in front of the camera, right here, this particular slide right here is the one you'll be looking at in your slideshow, PowerPoint show. That slide basically says that when you do methamphetamine, for example, I'm using meth as a drug, just we'll talk about here. You go from wherever your metabolism is all the way to your dopamine metabolism, all the way to euphoria, which is 100% of the pleasure molecules in your brain are released. 100% of the receptors are occupied. So this is actually quite a stimulation. Funny enough, methamphetamine, or tragically enough, methamphetamine actually looks quite like the dopamine molecule. So once you've depleted all your naturally occurring dopamine, methamphetamine acts like dopamine. So you stay high for a long time, and you try to stay there as long as you can. And finally, over a period of time, sometimes with meth it might be over a week, your receptor molecules give out. And they tire out and they say no more, so they shut down and you crash. And you go from wherever you were up all the way down, completely down to just not having very good brain chemistry at all, and tremendously dysphoric or bad feeling. And a lot of times people may stay there for a while. And it's not that they're sleeping, it's that some systems in their brain have gone offline. For example, with meth, you've depleted your dopamine, but that dopamine is like a gas pedal. It's really activating the brain. At the same time, other parts of the brain are trying to slow it down. Serotonin is being released, trying to slow the brain down. The naturally occurring endorphins, enkephalins, and dynorphins, or what's called the naturally occurring opioids, are being released to try to slow this process down. So by the time you actually crash, you've not only released a lot of dopamine and depleted that, but you've also released and depleted your serotonin and your opioids in your system, your naturally occurring opioids. So you're pretty well offline. Now remember that depletion, because that's going to be the reason that people start scratching. Let's say later on you'll see a lot of meth users start scratching their skin. Well, the reason is that they've depleted the naturally occurring opioids, the endorphins in their body, so that that normally kind of modulates the proprioceptive nervous system, and they've depleted that. So that's one of the reasons they start scratching. We'll see a picture of that in a little bit. But when they wake up on this, then they go back to drug seeking. They start drug seeking, and then it can end up being a binge. You might wait for months before you go on another one, but these things tend to shorten in the interim. And or it could be just a regular way of life, and that's what the next picture, the cycle, shows, is that this can be a way of life. And it's a way of life that surrounds death, because there's no life to it. But it fooled you. The human condition, we basically, when we talk about addiction, there are people that have a genetic propensity. And that means that this reward pathway calibrates faster in them than it does in other people. Genetically is predisposed to calibrate to a new stimuli and to create a behavior to match that new stimuli faster than other people. And that's one thing. Basic neurochemical makeup. There's some studies out there that have been based on populations that show that maybe 50 to 80%, even up to 80% of the people who become injured by drugs have a pre-existing and probably diagnosable psychiatric condition, and most often it's depression disorder. Sometimes it's anxiety, sometimes it's bipolar, sometimes schizophrenia and other things, post-traumatic stress. All of these will create a brain chemistry that's in need, and a brain chemistry in need is very easy to hijack. Psychological dispositions, we all know about that. If something's happened to you, if your psychology is sort of messed up, or you're having issues, then you're more vulnerable. Same thing with the social conditions. If it's more prevalent and accepted, then you tend to follow it. And the last one, existential angst. I got this from Viktor Frankl, who was a prisoner of war. Actually not a prisoner of war, he was a Nazi death camp prisoner. And he survived, and he discovered there was one thing you couldn't take away from him, and that was his will to meaning, his will to have meaning, a meaningful life, even if he was in a death camp. So the end product of that is he believes that that's a central component for us to have in our lives. So anyway, Frankl did this, and he also basically said that if you don't have that, then you're very vulnerable in life to other things and not surviving. And I think that's also a component that would make you have a greater propensity to become injured by drugs. The next slide is from Stephen Stahl's book, Essential Psychopharmacology, and I drew a cannabinoid arm out there, and it basically shows you that all of these different drugs have different effects on the brain, but they all seem to come back to releasing dopamine. That's why they're addictive. So if you have amphetamines, they actually work on the dopamine itself, on the synapse itself. Cannabinoids have other things they do to the brain, but peripherally release dopamine. The same thing with PCP. It releases, or it causes an increase in gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, and causes a decrease in glutamate, which is the chemical that makes the brain go fast. GABA is the one that makes it go slow, so it slows your brain down, slows brain function down, and anesthetizes you, essentially. Same thing with hallucinogens. They activate serotonin, but peripherally it causes dopamine to be released. Same thing with nicotine. Activates acetylcholine, but causes nicotine to be released also, etc. Opioids do the same thing, and alcohol does the same thing. They do things to the brain that then causes certain things to happen that release dopamine. It causes the peripheral dopamine release. So I'm going to bow out right now, and I will put this as addiction part 2, and we'll move on. I'll come back in just a couple of minutes.